We could give them an update on where we're at too with the last thing. We're live. Let me check the page here real quick.
Good to go?
And Kelly, it apparently, I need permissions from the host to be able to record.
Let's see. Make allow to record, and I'm going to make you a co-host. Yes, and I'm Angie. I'm going to make you co-host in case I go bye-bye. And I think we should be good to go.
Okay, I'm going to start the recording. There we go.
Okay, let's call the Wasco County Citizens Advisory Group and the Wasco County Planning Commission meeting to order. First item is roll call.
Vicki Ashley. I see you mouthing it. I see you, Vicki. Russell Hargrave.
Yep, Russell Hargrave from Mosier.
Thank you. Brad DeHart.
I'm here.
Lynn McIntyre.
Present.
Mike Davis.
Present, Ty Valley.
Kate Willis.
Here, Ty Valley.
Leroy Booth.
Here, the Dows.
And I'd just like to acknowledge that Chris Shano was not able to attend, and Marcus Swift, I do not see you. Are you there? I don't believe we have Marcus today. I don't know that we'll need it, but that certainly is a quorum, Chair.
Okay, and do we need to now recognize alternates that might be voting today?
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt if you wanted to. If you ended up making any decisions today, it wouldn't hurt to recognize them. So that would be
okay, and that is Leroy and Kate, correct?
Kate is now a full-time member.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, Kate.
just Leroy.
So just Leroy. So can I have a motion to recognize Leroy as voting member today?
I move that Leroy is a voting member today. This is Mike Davis.
Do I have a second?
Second that.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay.
I'd like to
All
also just, I failed to call staff roll. I apologize. So I'm Angie Brewer, Wasco County Planning Director for the record. I'll let Kelly and Will introduce themselves.
Kelly Housley Glover, Long Range Special Projects Planner.
Will Smith, Senior Planner.
And then Isaac and Jency.
Jency Smith, Planning Coordinator.
Isaac Stats, Assistant Long Range Planner.
Thank you. All right, first, the next item is public comment. Is there anyone here that wants to discuss anything that's not on the agenda?
Let's see, I have a couple of comments, but they're kind of related to Ludo. So I'll just, are you going to be asking for comments later?
This is your time.
Or you might say no. Okay.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. We're going to speak about Ludo issues.
Right.
In a bit, so.
I have a couple of comments if somebody else doesn't make them first. So yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right, anything else from anyone that's not on the agenda? Okay, could I have, see, we have minutes from the CAG from August 4th. Does anyone have any additions or corrections? If not, could I have a motion, please?
I move that the minutes be approved as read.
I second it.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, August 4th minutes of the CAG were approved. And we have the October 6 minutes of the Planning Commission hearing. Any additions or corrections?
I move those minutes be accepted.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. All right. Kelly, would you like to begin your presentation?
Yes, thank you. Can you guys see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about the Ludo update. I wanted to go over the project scope, the process for the update, and then talk about advisory groups. So the scope that staff has prepared for you consists of 12 key work tasks. Those are separated into two main groups. One are legislative updates or other required updates that we need to make the land use and development ordinance just up to date, efficient, codify all those changes that have gone through the legislature or things that staff have identified as problematic. We also underwent a model code audit from the Angelo Planning Group in, I want to say 2016. And we'll be incorporating that feedback as well. And that really is just to get us aligned with state requirements. We also have a series of updates based on all the feedback that we got during Wasco County 2040. So I'm going to break that down a little bit further for you. This coming year, similar to Wasco County 2040, the approach that we've chosen is to get the low-hanging fruit out of the way. So all those things that are mandatory, that are required, that can really help efficiency with the permitting process from a current planning perspective. We want to get those done and out of the way. We don't think that there's anything too controversial. These are, again, either state required or they're things that we've talked about to the public during Wasco County 2040. But I've outlined them here. So we have all those legislative updates. The department has really not codified the majority of legislative updates that have happened since 2012. Staff is able to administer those directly from statute, but obviously it just makes for more transparency and clarity with the planners and with the public if we actually put it in the Ludo. As I mentioned, we went through a model code update that really identified some problems. I don't want to say problems, but some potential conflicts with the model code in our EFU and our forest lands chapter. So we have that audit and information ready to just plug in and go. And again, that's going to make us consistent with what state law requires in those zones. We did, a fair amount of work on Goal 5 over Wasco County 2040 as required by the state. Those were a lot of the mandatory periodic review work tasks. And so we're going to continue that by updating that. You'll also note in the scope of work that I sent, we'd actually really like to get away from the term environmental protection district because it's really misleading for the bulk of our overlay zones. So that's one of the biggest transitions we'll be making, but we hope, again, it's going to offer a lot more clarity to what those overlay zones actually are. We have two chapters that are also really process driven. So they're really planner focused and also surveyor focused, chapter 21 surveyor focused, and staff and the surveyors and surveyors past have really identified some problems with these two chapters. So we want to get in there and clean those up. We've been working on these two chapters for over a year behind the scenes to really identify and make sure that we are aligned with state law. And then finally, you'll remember a couple years ago, we talked to the public about agritourism. And the broad consensus was that Wasco County residents wanted to see us adopt all possible agritourism provisions provided by state law. So we'll be going ahead with that in 2021. In 2022 is really where we get into some of the meatier issues, the issues that are again really community driven and deserve another opportunity for serious public engagement. And we also have two required chapters. There have been a number of legislative bills that have gone through related to solar and other commercial energy projects, which is chapter 19 in our land use and development ordinance. So we need to do that. There is also some indication that we really should be treating our communications facilities, so cell phone towers, separately than we do other types of utility facilities. And so the recommendation from staff is that we develop and adopt a separate communications facilities chapter. And you will remember we had some contact with some members of the public a couple years ago who were pretty outspoken about their desire to see us potentially adopt more stringent communications facilities requirements and criteria. And they presented Hood River as really a model of that. I think this, if you'll recall, was based on a tower that went up by Shady Brook. So we'll definitely be taking a look at that, taking an opportunity to do that. Wasco County 2040 had a whole series of recommendations, a lot related to housing. So one of the things that we talked to the public about were short-term rentals and whether there was any perceived need to adopt some regulations related to basically like Airbnb, VRBO. So we'll be visiting that topic with the public. We've got a number of housing issues to address. So accessory dwelling units was a really hot topic. We also received quite a bit of consensus about removing prohibitions against single wide mobile homes, with the caveat that residents wanted an opportunity to think really critically about a possible design criteria that somebody would have to meet to place a single wide mobile home. So we'll be wanting to have some pretty robust discussions with the public about design criteria. Will Smith, as you know, is currently convening the Community Wildfire Protection Plan to work on updating that plan, and that will come with recommendations for fire safety standards. So we can see highly probable that we'll be editing chapter 10, which is our fire safety standards. And really what that's going to look like is some modifications based on better science, best available data on defensible space. Potentially, there's been a lot of discussion statewide about building code standards that we could potentially incorporate. So those are going to be all things that he's looking at during the CWP process that will translate into criteria and regulation. Depending on the outcome of the board hearing tomorrow, and there was some discussion about this. EPD 15 would really be the destination resort eligibility map that we discussed in September. Just to give you a heads up, there's been some indication by members of the Board of County Commissioners that they potentially would like to remove the one site in the Juniper Flat sort of Pine Grove area and just reduce the map down to Washington Family Ranch. So we'll see how that goes. But in any case, it does sound like we will proceed with adopting some eligibility map. And in that case, we will need to talk to the public about the criteria that we want to have for permitting a destination resort. And the community in particular, you'll remember, in March, they came to talk to us about removing the 2 locations, one in Petersburg and one on Matai Ridge. The biggest concerns from the community are fire and water. So I expect us to potentially adopt some additional restrictions or criteria related to fire and water with that. We also have lots of other little things that came out of Wasco County 2040. So, best available data, outreach, sort of triggers for coordination with other agencies. So lots of little housekeeping things that we need to address and also have a public conversation about. So, as I mentioned, 2021, really we're starting slow with the things that are predominantly mandatory to, again, be able to spread the word, get everybody involved. And then following year is when we really open up to have some of the tougher conversations with the public. So the process from here on out is, as I mentioned, some of the chapters we've already been working on the last year. We thought we were going to have a little bit more time, but with COVID, obviously that's tightened some of the timelines. But we will have December through March to really do a lot of the research in preparation for everything on our scope. And that's why we've scheduled the scope the way it is. We want to spend March through August really having those community meetings. We know summer is not, a favorite time of year to do community meetings. So we've tried to make everything more in the spring when it's more accessible to the farmers. But unfortunately, just the way it goes, we will have some opportunities to talk to the public in August. And then really going through the hearings process each year, September through December. And that's to give us a nice buffer to allow for multiple hearings. It's something that I planned for with Wasco County 2040. We were pretty fortunate to be consistently ahead of schedule, with the exception of this year. And obviously we had some pretty serious extenuating circumstances and a lot of public interest that necessitated us pushing back a little bit. So the intention is, we know the public really likes to see the drafts ASAP, so they have a lot of time to process and respond. And when we're dealing with the Ludo, as opposed to Wasco County 2040, we're really talking about that criteria and regulations. So there's, it's less abstract and much more black and white. So the intention is to have those drafts available at the work sessions so that the public can really digest the information that we're presenting. We're proposing, and I'm working with Isaac, who thankfully has a lot of wonderful website experience, to repurpose our current website, project website. We're going to keep the URL the same, so nobody has to update those links, but we're going to be transitioning in the next month over to the Ludo update and refreshing it and really making it work for this process as opposed to Wasco County 2040. We've been able to build a pretty stellar social media following over the last several years. So we're going to continue to capitalize on that and leverage that for outreach. Obviously, we are required to do mailed notices. So we will be doing those. I anticipate in the second year us doing 2 of those. Then, of course, we've got monthly surveys, a newsletter. I'm, as we speak, working on a public participation plan. It'll be pretty familiar for those of you who were on the commission at the time of Wasco County 2040 initiation. The only difference is obviously we're going to likely be in the scenario to have to do a lot more virtual meetings and virtual roadshows. So we are actively working on either looking at satellite meetings where we could have viewing parties, particularly for folks in South County that are constrained by limited infrastructure in terms of the internet. We're also working with some other county departments on exploring community kiosk stations that we would have in a couple locations where they could come and participate in some of the exercises with no technology. And we hope that will really help fill some of the gaps that we know folks are frustrated with the technology issues. And it's you know, frankly, not ideal, but the positive thing is we have seen a lot more participation since we've enabled video conferencing. So sort of pros and cons to both. So the last thing I really wanted some good discussion on tonight is obviously we created the Citizen Advisory Group as a second layer for the Wasco County 2040 process. And I wanted to get the Commission's perspective on that. Do we think that's an effective model moving forward, or is that confusing to the public? And if it's confusing, should we just eliminate that model, just stick with the Planning Commission as the legislative body, continue to have you know, work sessions, but and obviously planning commissioners could participate in that, but not have that sort of redundant layer. And then the other thing that I think is worthwhile having a discussion is, it is our intention, as I mentioned, to leverage technical advisory groups. We did have a periodic review assistance team. So a lot of state agencies participated behind the scenes in giving us feedback about the document. But for our more technical chapters, we'd really like to reach out to experts. So in the case of chapter 2, we've gone through, like I said, a couple layers of staff review and work. And the next phase is to send that on to legal counsel, because they're really the most qualified to give us feedback on parliamentary procedure and what's required within the letter of the law. Chapter 21, as I mentioned, our surveyors have a vested interest in seeing this really updated, and they're the ones who have been pushing on the department to update it for, I think, boy, over a decade. So we'd like to convene a technical advisory group of surveyors. Our old surveyor, Dan Bolt, our current surveyor, Bradley Cross, and then potentially a couple representatives from local surveying organizations to give us feedback on that. And then there will likely be other opportunities where we want to leverage those technical advisory skills. The solar projects is one example where we'd likely want to convene people who've gone through the process to give us feedback. The other thing I think is probably worth mentioning, it's not a technical advisory group, but it's something that Angie and I, based on some of the feedback recently about our documents and some of the barriers to really understanding some of the documentation, is we will also be utilizing sort of an informal focus group to pass some of our information by. So people who don't speak planner can really take another crack at looking at the document and making sure it makes sense. So the other point on this slide is that we did use that consultant, DLCD paid for a consultant to review our code and give us feedback based on the model code. And so we already have that data ready to go. It's really just taking it off the shelf and polishing it up and making it ready to go. So just to reiterate, we'd really like this process to be driven by subject experts, and then obviously with a pretty robust public involvement piece. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. You will have gotten a copy of the work plan. I can talk through process some more, and then I'd like to hear your feedback on technical advisors and then also on the Citizens Advisory Group. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the work plan. If anyone has questions about the work plan that's laid out. For Kelly? I had one question. on the update of chapter 21, you have exploring combining PUDs and subdivision criteria. Can you explain that a little more?
Certainly. So our first pass at this chapter and chapter 2 was to have all the current planners and myself participate in a weekly session where somebody took a section of it, did a bunch of research, including comparative research with other codes and looking at the nexus with state law, and also any kinds of cases that have gone to LUBA or Supreme Court, and see how other people were doing it, see how we were doing it, see what the nexus was. And one of the frustrations with the current planning staff when comparing was that our subdivision is built into our partition. It's built into 21, where planned unit developments have a standalone chapter. And it can be really confusing, not just for planners, but also for the public. So the idea was first to merge everything related to land divisions. So we'd have the planned unit developments in the chapter 21. And then the next step would be to take out anything related to transportation. So any of those road standards that are within the partition chapter become a standalone chapter. And that's, I don't want to say it's standard because every county does this a little bit different, but from a current planner's perspective, they really think it's more of an ideal, transparent way to go.
Were the infrastructure standards different in the PUD section, or were there special allowances for road widths, or why did that have
not compared with subdivisions? There are one or two criteria that are unique to planned unit developments, but on the whole, it's pretty similar to subdivisions. So
Okay.
That's why there was like this feeling of redundancy and frustration.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have questions about the work tasks?
I do. This is Kate. I'd like to hear more about agritourism. And I'm sorry, Kelly, maybe you already covered it, but I know that's coming in 2021. And then a lot of the other things like housing and the other topics are coming in 2022. Was there a rhyme or reason to how things were put in that order? And could you just talk a little bit more about agritourism? Because it sounds like that happened a while. It sounds like there was a lot more underneath that topic.
No, there wasn't. There's really not much to agritourism. Basically, we talked to the public, I want to say it was one of the first things we did. It was work task 3, I want to say, where we said, hey, what do you think? Do you want to allow agritourism or not? Do you want us to add special regulations? Do you want, what do you want? And the consensus really was, let's just roll the dice and see how it goes. So give us everything that state law allows in terms of agritourism and put it right into the code. And let's see what happens. This is the public saying this, not planners saying this. So in a sense, all we're doing is taking state law, what allows, so this is a may, it's a may, not a shall. We're taking that may for agritourism, and we're just going to put it right in the land use and development ordinance. And why that makes sense to do in this year is that we're going to be doing legislative updates and model code updates, which will impact the EFU zone. So a lot of the work we're going to be doing to the EFU zone A1160 is going to happen next year.
Okay, so it's just teeing it up in the same way that you did eligibility for destination resort. It's just pulling everything out, teeing it up, so it's kind of ready to reference. Is that the idea?
I want to make sure I understand your question. So, because there's really, it's not a close comparison to destination resorts, only in the sense that it's not it would be a permissible use, but it's not like we're approving anything.
Right. You weren't for destination resorts either, right? I mean, I'm just saying it was a survey that was done. It was research that was done to pull it all together to say what would apply or not, where. So you're saying in this agritourism, it's going to be like a big survey to find out what, no, okay, then
No.
I'm misunderstanding it.
No, in 2012, the legislature passed a robust bill to permit agritourism, and there's like a whole legal speak as a permitted use in exclusive farm use zones. And it includes events, it includes it's like activities and uses. And we have a really small portion of those permitted now in Wasco County, but we don't have the full scope of what state law allows. So when we talked to the public and we said, what do you want us, because in 2017, they said really clear that the public told us very clearly, we need more economic development opportunities. We need you to throw everything in the kitchen sink at giving us opportunities to make money on our farms. And so that's why we went through the destination resorts, the agritourism, some of those other concepts like transfer development rights, non-resource zones. And but we started with agritourism, I think, in the first year. We asked, what do you want us to do? Are you a yes or a no? And if you're a yes, do you want it the whole thing? Do you want parts of the thing? Do you want to add some additional restrictions? Because we have that flexibility. And really, the consensus from the public was, we don't want to monkey with it. We don't want to add any additional restrictions or criteria. We really want you to take what is allowed in state law and now make it allowed in Wasco County. So it would be filed under, I think in most cases, it's a conditional use permit. Some cases it may be subject to standards, but it would just be plopped right into the zone under uses permitted. Subject
Okay,
to
thank
standards
you.
or conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments about work tasks?
I have a question on the agriculture or ag tourism. I'm a little confused at what you're saying there, in the sense that you're saying that the state has guidelines for agriculture or ag tourism, and the county has the ability to either use them or don't use them, or pick and choose, basically, as to how they want to apply that. Is that correct?
I wouldn't call them guidelines. I would call them permissions.
Okay, so the county can say, in this particular case, because I'm not sure why, we can pick and choose, but on other things we can't pick and choose.
Correct. Yeah, it's a may. We have things in state law that are either with let's just talk about exclusive farm use. So A1160. We have a list according to state law of things that we are required to permit. And it also tells us how we permit them. So are they permitted outright? Are they permitted with a ministerial application? Are they permitted subject to standards? Are they permitted conditional use permit? And that, I want to emphasize, is what the model code analysis and audit did. Would say, okay, we're going to look at all those things in your EFU. And we're going to tell you whether you're consistent with what state law says or you're inconsistent. There's this other list. I think they're called Schedule A and Schedule B, but I could be wrong. There's this other list, the B list, which is, these are things you can choose to allow in your EFU zones in the state of Oregon. And most of those in Wasco County, we permit. There are a few exceptions with things that we just haven't updated, and agritourism is one of those. And that's why we honed in on it for Wasco County 2040. But non-farm dwellings are a really good example. Not all communities, not all counties in Oregon permit non-farm dwellings. That's a thing that you can do or you don't have to do. So agritourism's on that. You can do it or you don't have to do it. And that's why we wanted public input on it. Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions, Tess? If not, then we'll go to the next question which was about the role of the CAG at this point. Is that correct, Kelly?
Well, the next thing I wanted feedback was specifically the process. So if there were any high points, low points, things you'd really like staff to focus on in terms of outreach, if the schedule sounds good to you, any of that kind of feedback would be wonderful to hear. Also, one of the things that we didn't discuss is we do have a placeholder for any other work that we haven't identified. So it would be a good opportunity to talk about that too.
Does anyone have any comments about process, schedule?
This is Kate again. I just have a comment, and it may or may not be doable. In terms of engagement or outreach, I do know that for South Wasco, connecting with people down here is really best done through the local Facebook channels. And so I'm wondering, is that in the toolkit for finding people where they are, where they actually go? I think for down here that would really help. And we had to, I remember Kelly contacting you so that we could get exactly the correct information so it could go out on Facebook channels, because there was a lot of misinformation going around. So that's just one thought or question.
Yeah, so we do proactively use social media. It's just we limit, well, I'll say we don't share in Facebook groups because that opens us up for a lot of commentary, which we then have to incorporate in the record, and it becomes kind of a management issue for us. But that information is available for people to share in those spaces. And I know some commissioners have, I know some of the board of county commissioners have shared it in those spaces. We could certainly think strategically about that, spend some time thinking about that, because we do know Facebook in particular is a really powerful method for reaching people. So any specific feedback you have about that, or thoughts or ideas, would be really appreciated.
My one just response to that would be, yeah, if we were strategic about it and there were key points, not everything, but some really key points that are going to create conflict, and we know this from the 2040 process or whatever, key things, and that we had some really good visuals, or we spent a little extra time on some communication collateral. I do think that Mike and I and folks, Vicky down here, and each of us could kind of spread out in our networks with Leroy and other folks, Lynn in the Dalles, and we've got folks in Mosier, Russ, so we could spread out into where our communities are, and just a one-way communication. It's not, I don't even post them to Facebook.
Are you talking? You're talking about Facebook?
Well, I'm talking about for our community. I'm just talking about in South Wasco, and it really might be different for Vicky, but I know that where Mike and I are, Facebook is the way, that is the go-to place. And so if there would just be, as a kind of to inoculate against misinformation, I could see us being more strategic about putting key information out there proactively on websites at the same time that other communication channels are, other communication strategy is going out, and just having it be a one-way. It's not a conversation, it's just a posting.
I think my take is that to the extent that it's public website, it's a good thing. But when you're talking about specific, for-profit applications like Facebook or whatever the application du jour is, I think a government entity needs to be really careful embracing a particular brand of website. And also, a lot of us don't have any access to that at all. It's not public information. It's just, you have to sign up for it and be a member of Facebook to access it.
I'm just suggesting that, I'm not suggesting that that staff goes directly there. I'm saying that as commissioners, part of our role as being a commissioner is to connect with our community
Yeah,
and
sure,
bring back
absolutely.
to our constituency, right? So I do
Yeah.
think, and I, as a commissioner, I don't necessarily want to post, but I do know the people who go to those sites. I'm not on them, but I know people who use them and they're friends. And I could just say, this is the correct information. Would you mind posting it? So people have the facts.
I have to comment on that. In my part and even further south, Facebook is our main communication among Antelope, Shannecoe, and south of Maupin.
Definitely. Definitely. It is.
I think it might be important to just recognize that pushing information out through Facebook would ultimately bring people back to our website as sort of the foundational element of publicly available information and making sure that everyone's being pointed to an accurate source. So I think, you know, we definitely hear you. Facebook is going to be part of a multitude of tools that we employ for this next phase. But it would be helpful to know from those of you that have dedicated groups, what groups exist out there, because, you know, we don't live in those communities and we're not necessarily aware of exactly what those groups are called. So if there's Facebook group names that you want to make sure we've got exactly right. I mean, Kelly, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm not aware of all of them in South County.
There's just South Wasco County group that
That's like the
a lot
happenings of South
people look
Wasco.
at.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the page is friends with that group. So I guess what I'm hearing is that, so I push out to current planners every cycle. I push them out sort of like a cheat sheet on how to respond to the public. And what I'm hearing, Kate, you can correct me if this isn't what you mean, but what I'm hearing is what you guys really need to communicate effectively is kind of like a toolkit. So for every update, you have some of that collateral. You have, you know, highly visual things that you could post up to Facebook, or you could send in an email. You've got links to all the information. You've got kind of an FAQ, so like basic bullet points. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Kate?
Yes, and I like Angie's comment that we don't get in the middle of, we are not translating any of that. It goes back to the source, which is the website where you post your stuff, but it gets to the capillaries, it gets to the end of the county, and it's the same message, but we can help deliver it, or we can tell you where to post it. And then at a minimum, I just feel like that would stop some of the spin, because when we're having events or we're inviting people into sites, we won't be able to eliminate all of it, but I think we could do a better job with getting rid of some of the noise. And nip it in the bud. You know what I mean? Don't let it, just do it proactively.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
I have one thing that I think might help going forward is I've been out to the Wasco 2040 a couple times, and it to me it's not user friendly. You know, in the sense, I know when Kelly, you go out there, or Will, you go out there, you can go right in, you can navigate the sub menus and everything really quick, and it's like, okay, how'd you get there? It would seem like if you had something at the top layer, right up on the top that said latest update, you know, or last posting, or something that people could go to get the current blob, or, you know, blurb about whatever's going on, so that they can keep up to it instead of having to go down this menu, that menu, and everything else, because that's where you lose people if they have to go search. Whereas if it's right there staring them in the face, with one click, they're there. It might be helpful.
Yeah, that's great feedback. That's something we've actually talked to, as a group about. This project, the Ludo update's a lot more straightforward in a way. So it's a lot less big picture, and so there's a lot less context that we need to provide, and it's going to lend itself, I think, to a very different template, which we're working on. That I think Leroy will really address that issue. So. But I think that's great feedback, because I think that tells us we're on the right path.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions about process? Kelly, what did you mean about work task 13 when you said that you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah, no, we in looking over the scope, if anybody on the planning commission felt like whoa, I thought we were going to talk about this, that this would be a really good time to address any of those issues.
Okay, I don't hear anything jumping out. Okay, let's see. You want to talk about Citizens Advisory Group? And okay, personally, I think that the work of the Citizens Advisory Group is done, and that I feel like continuing that into the Ludo is, yes, redundant. And I think the Planning Commission can have their work sessions, and as they used to do before 2040. Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I agree. This is Brad. I agree with that.
I totally agree also.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts about that?
Well, I don't disagree, and it would certainly be simpler, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's some advantage to having, in theory, a smaller group of people that are more focused and can go a little deeper. I don't think that happens in practice, because you get a smaller group of people that are available on that day and a different smaller group on another day. So if we wanted to try and get more depth with a smaller group, we'd probably be better off to assign a specific subcommittee. And I do think that the name is confusing.
Okay. Thank you, Russ. Kelly, does that answer that question for you?
Yeah, I think that's right on track with what staff is thinking and feeling.
Okay.
Is that it was a necessary layer for the comp plan, but really doesn't seem like it's going to jibe well with the schedule. I'm interested in this. Russ's idea of work groups. Is that something that the commission is interested in exploring? Is having a couple of you guys picking some of the work tasks and drilling down on that, or
I'm
I
leery
don't want to
of
misrepresent.
the careful be what you wish for type, because certainly it sounds like more work, but I might be interested in that. To me, and I was there when we incubated this idea of having this citizens advisory group, and the advantage that I saw was that you could get a smaller group of people to have more deeper knowledge and be more up to speed on these issues, and then they in turn could help to proliferate that knowledge through the broader planning commission. It doesn't work that way because the way we've structured it. So if you wanted to kick off a work group or a committee or something, whatever is the right thing to call it, then it would achieve that purpose because you'd have a certain set of people that are expected to follow it through. And I know our team would do that. And I would support it. So yeah, I would be interested in that.
The concern I would have with that is, what do you mean by work group? Is that going to be a separate meeting than the planning commission? Or would there be, so that would be the question is, okay, can you do that? Stuff along those lines. So what I saw with the CAG was that we'd go to the public meeting. The planner was then go back and summarize that and present it. And then we'd vote on it. It would seem like it might be beneficial to present it, discuss it, and then maybe come back to it later as far as a vote so that you have time to actually digest what you received. I think there wasn't sufficient, or I would have liked to have seen more time on some of the more complex matters to actually take it back and think about it for a week or two, and so it just seemed like that'd be better if you had actually a week between the presentation and then the actual meeting or something along those lines, just more time to digest it.
So are you talking about more work session meetings then?
If you want to call them that, yes. It just seemed like you didn't necessarily have time to actually digest it and get more feedback from your people you were working with. Maybe that's just my perception.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question to clarify. With the timelines shown in the scope, is there sufficient time built in to allow for additional work group meetings in between the planning commission?
You make your voice do that.
Am I turning?
You're a robot, Angie. Yeah.
I think what I heard Leroy saying is that, we can have our work session meetings and then, allow some time to digest what we reviewed and get feedback from Kelly or have questions, Kelly answer questions or whatever. And then perhaps if we needed another work session to follow up with things before it went to the planning commission for voting. Is that what you're talking about, Leroy?
Yeah, it just seemed like we tried to, because there was a couple times it's like, well, do we need to spend more time on this, and do we have to vote on it right now? It just seemed compressed.
It might mean that in some months that we would need to have, several meetings. Is that something people are willing to do in order to stay on schedule?
This is Vicki.
This is Kate. I honestly, I wouldn't be able to devote more time to this at the moment. That's just for me.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn,
Yes.
I'm kind of like Leroy. Some of these complex issues, we had the presentation and 30 minutes later we had to vote on them. I would like time to study some of them if they're very controversial, a little and more in depth. And maybe 2 weeks later or even a month later, then vote on it.
I guess I want to butt in here because I'm a little confused. Just because that's essentially what was happening with the CAG. We were having a CAG work session. The presentation was typically almost verbatim from what you were seeing at the planning commission level. There wasn't an anticipation that you were voting or passing anything at the CAG level. So, and there was always a month in between the CAG meeting and the planning commission meeting when it was an actual legislative first evidentiary hearing. So I'm hearing kind of conflicting, yeah, let's do away with CAG, but no, I need a work session. So, but We could have a work session like we did with the CAG and just not call it CAG. We could call it Planning Commission work session if it's the semantics. But yeah. Angie, it looked like you had something to add.
I just don't know if you guys heard my question before I turned into a robot there. I have a similar observation, and I'm just not sure that the timeline as it exists in the scoping document would allow for multiple meetings in between. And I just wanted to ask you to kind of gut check that for me on the fly. Apologies, Kelly, but I'm not sure that there's a lot of time built in to having multiple technical teams running on the side.
Mhm.
I do think it would be more straightforward for the average participant, member of the public, to only have to, well, to sort of more, maybe be more straightforward if it was just the planning commission hosting public work sessions. And not have to sort of figure out what hat you're wearing or what it means for the process or anything like that. I think there was some confusion last time around because of that.
Yes, that's what I was referring to, a planning commission work session, not anything other than that.
Okay. So, one thing that I think is worth having a discussion about it with the timeline is we've been strategic in trying to get all the legislative updates happening kind of around the same month and time. And that's for pecuniary reasons. So for costs, basically, we have to send a Measure 56 anytime we're making a major legislative update. And if we were to stagger them, we're talking about having to send out a mailer to every county resident every month. That's tens of thousands of dollars. So really trying to streamline that into kind of one package. The way Angie and I discussed that package is splitting it up into 2 meetings, specifically in September for the Planning Commission. So we do, or alternatively, we could do just a whole day-long meeting, which I know some members of the Planning Commission are work, and that's really difficult for them to peel away for a full day. So there are some options there, but that's certainly a consideration, is we could have a full meeting in the beginning of the month, September, to cover all the bases and then split off into 2 legislative hearings. I do also want to make it clear, to underline the fact that all the public work sessions that are outlined here, they're going to be significantly different than the road shows you're familiar with for Wasco County 2040. Again, because we're rulemaking, we're writing policy, we're writing criteria and regulations. So the intention is to actually have the Ludo chapter or section or whatever it is on the table for the public to look at and give feedback on. So I think some of the gray areas when we're policy making and we're making implementation measures that where you're feeling that discomfort, I think we're not going to be running into that as much with the Ludo update, because it really should be much more straightforward. And it's going to be a language that the general public generally is more familiar with, because it's rulemaking, it's less policy. So I don't know if that helps, but so for instance, legislative model code updates, the public and the Planning Commission is going to have access to those revisions in the Ludo in May of next year. So you're going to get to actually see a draft of the marked up Ludo and be able to provide comment, provide feedback at the same time the public is. We take in the public feedback as much as we have wiggle room, again, because some of these things are required by law. And we can certainly between May and September have a separate meeting. We could say, okay, between May and September, maybe to wrap up those legislative model code updates, we want to have a Planning Commission work session in June. That's definitely on the table and might be really effective, particularly if we can do small bite-sized chunks. that increase the flexibility for current planners when they need to have meetings, because that's been a little bit of a challenge for the last several years, is that typically the long range stuff takes up 2 hours, 3 hours. And so current planners have had to be extremely flexible in when they're scheduling the actual hearings. But if we were to do these bite-sized chunks, we might be able to squeeze them in here and there. Alternatively, we could use September and October to do all the planning commissions, start the first evidentiary in September, and then take it all the way through October to have 2 months. And then with the goal of having everything before the board. Remember that they have to have 2 hearings in November. If you think that that's doable. But I need to get that feedback. And I think it would be helpful to know, because we're talking about doing everything within the space of a couple months. If we're really thinking we want a couple meetings, or we want a really long full day meeting, or, you know, we want back-to-back meetings, that would be helpful.
Well, in this particular go around, since we are actually writing ordinance, we need to take the necessary time to make sure we convey what we're saying to the public and understand what we're saying, because those, you know, that's going to affect people. So I think we need to take the time necessary to accomplish that task and make sure we get it right the first time. So maybe smaller pieces so we can be clear as far as what we're doing is a better way of doing it.
Anyone else have thoughts about that?
This is Kate. It's not a fully baked thought, but I like what Leroy is saying. That makes sense. On the other hand, I guess it feels like there's context that we may need to have that comes with having more time, you know, understanding things in context of other things that they may relate to one another. So I'm game for either way. I do agree with the general sentiment of making sure that we understand, that we're thoughtful about the process, that we understand, and we have time to process it, and the public also has time to process it and understand what's going on.
Okay.
I guess it's a question. What way would make that easiest for all of us? I do think outside processing time is. Sorry, group processing, the time to discuss it with each other, I think is also very, very helpful, and ask staff as a group.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else have comments or thoughts about that? Okay, Kelly, I don't know if that provides sufficient guidance, or what would be most helpful to staff as well?
Well, I think the proposal that was sent to you was for 2 meetings in September for different tasks.
Okay.
And I'm hearing that maybe you'd like 4 meetings in September and October. So I guess thumbs down, thumbs up, you know, on that would be helpful for us to scope.
Actually, now, Kelly, that I'm hearing you say maybe 4 meetings in September, I do think I am weighing in. I'd like to have fewer meetings and maybe deal with more at one time. I think that, I don't know, that feels like dedicated space where we're having time to process it as a group. That's just me. We're all different kinds of learners, but I'd rather do it that way.
Kelly,
Fewer meetings.
Kelly, I need to get a clarification. Did you say 4 meetings for September and October or 4 for September?
So if you wanted to do a work session ahead of the legislative hearing, it would be 4 between, we could stretch it through October. So it could be 2 in September and 2 in October.
Okay, I'm for that. I couldn't do 4 in September, but
So just to be clear, you'd be having planning commission work sessions in the spring. Looks like in some cases multiple, but at least one planning commission work session that was open to the public to sort of review staff's proposed language and perhaps modify it if you felt necessary. And then you would want 2 hearings to first discuss it, to revisit it again as a group, make any final revisions, and then the first evidentiary hearing. So it would really be 3 or 4 for each task instead of 2 or 3 from start to finish.
Is that what you're wanting, Leroy?
Well, I'm trying to understand what's being asked. My perception is that you'd have first of all, you'd have the proposed wording for the legislative ordinance or whatever. Then you would have the session with the public to go over that wording. And you'd have that time for the planners or the commission to actually talk with the people at the meeting and try and understand it as a group for the wording. Then you would take that wording and your feedback and have a work session to come up with the final one and to vote on that. Is that what I hear saying?
I don't know that that's what was initially planned. I mean, there's several work sessions scheduled for the spring for the topics. And then we would have a public hearing after the work session.
So with the works,
After the planning commission went through and read everything the same time as the public is getting it, and then we massaged it, Kelly gets it back, comes up with the revised language, and then it comes back to planning commission a second time for a public hearing. Is that correct, Kelly?
I'm really confused. I'm sorry. I'm very, very confused.
I think it might help if we walked through one of the tasks.
Yeah.
Using
Because I think part of the problem is too, what we're dealing with in the first year versus the second year is it's really a different ballgame. The stuff next year, most of it's mandatory and required by law. So when you talk about massaging the language or having a lot of input from a planning commission perspective, it's just not there. Like it's very black and white. It's prescribed to us by state law. The edict that we've been given from leadership and by the public for the most part is don't be more restrictive than state law requires. So we're not looking to go beyond those 4 corners, except where the public, like agritourism, has said, yeah, let's go for it. So the way it's laid out is we take all these work tasks. Staff is going to be working on those drafts between December and March is when the first public work session is. So, and that starts with chapter 2. So chapter 2 is the procedures chapter in the land use and development ordinance. Basically, it talks about public notice. It talks about how to run a hearing. It talks about, the difference between the types of applications. Staff's gone through that, like I said, to look at the nexus between state law and any case law and really vet it to, again, We're not trying to overcomplicate it. We're trying to simplify it, and we're trying to make sure we're consistent with state law so that we don't have procedural errors and thus end up in LUBA. So we're going to finalize that draft. It's going to an attorney. They're going to vet it. Then the plan is to take it before the public in March and say, this is what we've come up with based on all this input. And we'd love your 2 cents. And we're going to clearly mark up in each document what's mandatory, so what's required, and what's optional, so that the public's really clear on that. Angie and I and Isaac have been working on some schema to do that. So it's super visual, it's super easy to read, and they can dig down for more information. But so March, we take it before the public and we say, hey, okay, this is the document, what's your feedback? We then take that feedback and we incorporate what we can. Because again, we get feedback all the time about things that are mandatory. This current work task is a prime example where we've gotten lots of feedback about it. Some folks are very frustrated about it, but you know, we have to do what state law requires. So we can certainly, anywhere where there's optionals, we can add in some options, some alternatives, alternative 1, alternative 2, and then it would be incumbent upon you as the commission at the time of the legislative hearing, just like you do for current planning applications, to really scrutinize those 2. You'd obviously have this in the packet at least a week in advance to make your notes, and then you'd have a discussion about it. So again, it's so much more black and white than the comp plan. The plan is to have you kind of blaze through those mandatory requirements in chunks, and then take on some of the more complicated things in separate chunks. So there should be ample time to understand, to talk to the public, to get feedback. I guess I'm just trying to understand, because I'm feeling a disconnect between the model that we had, which was the CAG, and then the Planning Commission, where it was like we have one session where you guys hear the presentation, you look at the material, you give feedback, and then we come back, it comes before you again. But it sounds like you didn't like that model, but then maybe we still want to stick with that model. So we could plan an August sessions that are work sessions.
I'm hearing something in addition to that, Kelly. I'm also hearing maybe there's some desire for additional time to digest the information, not necessarily more meetings, but more time to digest it. And is that
but that's what happened between the CAG and the Planning Commission. There was a month opportunity for folks to digest, to read the material, to follow up, and happy to allow that. You know, my door is certainly always open to have discussions with you guys about any of the material, but I guess
well, I was just going to add,
if it's not more meetings, what is it?
I was just going to add that there was 30 days built in, right? So just sort of highlighting the fact that if 30 days isn't enough in our past experience, what is it that's needed in order for folks to be able to digest it? So you just asked that question, but I would turn that around to you commissioners. What is missing from our current coordination with you all to allow you to the space and time, or maybe assistance, to digest it before decisions are being asked of you?
Anyone have comments on that?
I'm trying to digest it. I think this time that might be sufficient, because like Kelly is saying, it's going to be more pointed and it's not going to be wide, it's not going to be as open. I know that as I've read ORSs and or OARs and stuff along those lines, you start reading it, and by the time you get done with the subsection 5 B or D, you're like, what was the exception for this? And so that's what I'm saying, you know, or, you know, some of the definitions, you have to go research the definitions and stuff along those lines. And that's the kind of stuff that you really need to take the time and read it, because when you get down to exceptions or like that, and I don't know to what degree these new ordinances are going to be in that respect. And that's where I start getting concerned about making sure I totally understand what is being said.
So allowing for more time to read?
Well, it's not just
Is
to
that what you're
read.
asking?
It's not just to read, it's to understand the verbiage depending on how it's said. Because, you know, the verbiage is how one interprets what is being said. It has, everyone can interpret a different way depending on this or that, you know, as far as, you know, the wording in it, you know, or you have, you know, you can do it this way, subsection 1, and then that applies if A, B, and C apply, or this, and you know how complex, you know, as you read some of these ORSs and stuff, they can get pretty complex. And so that's where it comes an issue where it's, I called it here, you know, are we looking at all the options? And I understand some of it is going to be required and some is going to be option, but I just want to make sure that when the layman reads it, or someone who's not familiar with it, understands it.
Could I have a moment, Kelly, to just share my perspective? This is Brad. I certainly understand and appreciate the sense of urgency that I've felt, that I think Leroy is trying to express a little bit of, you know, maybe not being able to completely digest. And we, you know, the CAG made decisions, and then we had time to sit on it and think about it, and then we meet as a planning commission, and we made the same decisions oftentimes, right? I, for one, could probably stand to do a little bit more upfront review at times. But I'm certainly not interested in holding more meetings. And I don't think that would serve any of us very well. But I also will commit that if there is something in a meeting that I'm uncomfortable with and I feel like I need more time, then I'm going to be the first to speak up and say, I need more time. We need to adjust our schedule. But for right now, I'm okay with running forward with the schedule that you've laid out, recognizing that if we need some additional time, I'll be the first to say, I think we need to break now, give ourselves more time, and reschedule another meeting so that we can better understand this. And that doesn't really matter whether it's something that's in black and white that we don't have a whole lot of discretion with, or whether it's something that we have full discretion on. That's my take.
Okay, thank you, Brad. All right, is everybody comfortable with that?
That was really helpful, Brad. Yeah, I think that's right.
So what I heard from Brad, and maybe from Leroy too, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, is that what you really need is more tools, kind of like what Kate was saying, but that was outreach. Now we're talking about analysis, planning commission analysis. You need more tools to really make you feel comfortable ahead of work sessions or hearings, that you know what you're talking about and you're willing and ready to make decisions on it. So I'm not really sure what that looks like. But is that kind of what you're thinking, Leroy? Like you just you need
with
some
what
better
Brad
tools
said
to help you.
Yeah, what Brad said and what you just said, it made me think of maybe what I'm really saying is that when the definition or it's being explained, maybe spend a little bit more time on the details of why it's that way. Or what went into the thinking of the wording so that we understand what you're trying to say. And so that, I think with that modification, we could probably stick with the schedule.
Okay. Sound good to everybody?
We'll know it as we get there, Kelly. I think as we just well, let's just go forward and we'll figure it out as we go. We'll just got each other's backs and it'll be complicated, but we'll figure it out, and when we need help, we'll ask for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we just take Brad's position on this thing and we can raise our hand, and say, whoa, let's get some clarity. So all of us have that responsibility.
I just want to, I completely agree with everything's being said, and I'm glad we've reached a good place with this, but I just want to make it very clear that in the process of giving ourselves more time, just flag for yourself that if for some reason that more time exceeds beyond what we've publicly noticed, we may need to re-notice our first evidentiary hearing. And sorry, my dog thinks it's dinner time because of daylight savings. So she's.
And we recognize that comes at a cost, and we all need to be aware of that.
Yeah, so to that point, we may be asking for multiple meetings back to back to be able to, have that check-in with you and still meet that timeline, or get support to pursue a request for additional funds for additional notification.
I guess I would also suggest that as soon as materials come out for us to read, to jump on it and to allow enough time maybe to ask staff questions as we have them, might help speed things up. Okay, Kelly, what else do we need to do today?
I think that Sheila Dooley had some feedback for us, so I think we need to let Sheila, and I also see Jill Barker has joined us. If Jill has any feedback, I think that we can hear from them, and you guys can deliberate after that, and then we can all watch the election returns.
Okay,
Sheila, Sheila Dooley, 3300 Vinceville Road, Mosier. And this is probably a really premature question because I guess you're not going to be getting to the fire standards till 2022. But before the meeting, I was just wondering if this would include looking at things like adopting fire resistant material standards for houses for wildfire protection. Would you be looking at that kind of thing, you think, as part of the standards?
I'm going to kick that over to Senior Planner Will Smith.
We're going to be looking at all kinds of changes. Well, not to be determined, but we will be looking at changes through the Community Wildfire Protection Plan process. We have kicked that off recently, and that process is going to be running through this winter into next year. We are currently at the stage of taking fire district information, and we will be reaching out to federal agencies shortly. At some point, we will have a draft plan, and we will have public involvement and comments on that. And it will come with suggestions to see, what we had the 2018, the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire came in and gave us some recommendations. So we'll be taking a look at what they thought we might need to do and discuss those with communities and fire districts. And it will feed into our Chapter 10 update. So Chapter 10 or Chapter 11 in the scenic area is our fire safety standards. And so we'll be looking at updating some of those, such as, maybe coming to best management practices of what defensible space looks like. Right now, it's a hard 50 feet everywhere. Maybe it should be less in some areas, more in steeper areas, maybe more flexible scale, something along those lines. So we anticipate changes and updates stemming from what we learned from our outreach during the CWPP update.
Okay, well, thank you. Then I just one other comment on, you're talking about public participation in the Ludo. I really feel like these Zoom meetings are really convenient and they're much less intimidating than having to be there in person. But especially if you have a lot of people on the other side of what the issue you're talking about. But then I also realize that not everybody has the internet, and your internet can go down, at any time. So anyway, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
One quick question, Sheila. Would you like to be added to my email list for information about the CWPP update as we continue moving forward?
Sure. Do you want my email address? Do you guys probably have it?
I think I have it. I can
always give it to him.
Okay, thank
make
you.
sure I can get your permission to put you on that list.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Someone else had comments?
I don't know if she does. Jill Barker joined us as well. Jill, I don't know if you have any feedback you wanted to provide today. Sounds like maybe not.
Okay. All right. Okay, I guess then we'll move into, or do we need anything else, Kelly, on the commission? Okay. All right. Looks like our work is cut out for us for a couple years. Let's move on to discussion of other business. Planning Director.
All right, well, I can share a brief list. We've determined that we do not have any agenda items for the December standing meeting dates. So just a heads up, we'll be taking December off, and unless we get an appeal. I should not say that too loudly, but unless we get an appeal in the next few weeks, I don't think we would have notification timelines. We wouldn't be able to meet notification timelines for that anyways. So December, you're off the hook. Please be prepared for elections in January. We would be voting on chair and vice chair. So if you have any interest in that or feedback on that, feel free to give me a call directly. I wanted to just recognize that the staff has been fantastic. Clearly, you just learned a bit about the work that Kelly and now Isaac are working on, and they've been making significant progress. We've been spending a lot of time thinking about how to best engage the public moving forward, given the current circumstances. Will's been doing a stellar job with our current planning program. The permit volume has remained steady throughout this entire pandemic, which is kind of surprising, but has been consistent. We've got quite a few efficiencies projects going on in the background. Code compliance has made significant progress on their volume. For the first time in years, we've dropped below 50 cases, which is fantastic. Chris McNeil has dropped us from 70 to 40 cases in the last 6 months. He's been making great progress. Our Tri-County Household Hazardous Waste and Recycling Program has continued its collection events, and surprisingly, not surprisingly, people are still coming out of their house to share their collection of household hazardous waste and recyclable materials that we strive to collect in our 3-county jurisdiction. And David has been receiving some accolades for recent panel presentations, regionally and nationally. Our program is a bit unique for its scale and the resource it provides for our residents. I also want to make sure you're all aware that the Gorge 2020 process, sorry, my dog is convinced it's food time. She's being really noisy over right here. The Gorge 2020 process is still chugging along. They're in their appeal period at the moment, and my current work on that is to evaluate what that means for our future ordinance updates. Ultimately, what makes it through the appeals process will be coming to us in a formal transmittal, and we'll need to update our local scenic area ordinance. And some of the changes were rather sweeping, and some of them were just very detailed, so it'll be a bit of work. And then also just kind of remind you that we've got quite a few hazards efforts going on. So Will's leading the CWPP. We also have a FEMA grant for our geohazards update, and wrapping up some of the technical work on our flood map, the flood risk map update process. The world's melting over here clearly, but there's just a lot of hazards planning going on. I apologize, guys. a lot of hazards planning going on, and just want to make sure you're generally aware of that. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll probably be coming back to you in the near future with a bit of a summary. And we'll have to do something similar for the board as well, just to make sure you're all aware in case you get questions from the public. But also if there's any room for advising us on particular approaches with public meetings, or ensuring that our public feel like they're well informed and not surprised by anything moving forward. With that, I think that's it for me. We're just sort of continuously plugging along. Our program is still closed to the front counter is still closed to the public. Everyone is still working remotely with a few days in the office as needed. And it's continued to be a successful model for us. So we're looking at the silver linings of that and trying to kind of hang on to the efficiencies, benefits we've experienced. So I don't think I have anything else unless anyone has any questions for me. Again, I apologize for the background noise here.
Angie, this is just so way above and beyond. Parents must just have the hardest time right now. So good job.
Thank you. It's daylight savings throws an interesting gear, a wrench in the gears. Just they're both hungry and crazy at the moment. But no, the team's doing great work. Our scope of work hasn't skipped a beat. I'm really proud of the department and really grateful for your continued support through all of this, and the boards as well. So a big shout out to you all for your support and participation.
Thank you, Angie. Anybody have any questions for Angie? Okay. Great job, guys. And at this time, I guess I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Do I have a
I'll
second?
second.
I move we second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody hang around?
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody. I appreciate
Thank
the
you.
feedback tonight. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.